How do you make customers love the kind of work you do? We're going to be talking about it on today's episode, and a key mistake that too many business owners make, even when they're doing a good job, that leads to customers being unhappy with their work. We're going to dive into it today. Hello, my name is Blake Benz. I'm the host of the Good Advice Podcast, and this is the place to learn how to do business better. No fluff on the show, no academic stuff, no theory, just the stuff that actually works in business. Like I said, you've come to the right place to learn how to do it. So we're going to dive in. Before we do, we got a quick word from a sponsor of this podcast episode. Be back soon. See ya. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more. So it's been a little bit of time. We're a little bit out of our normal episode pacing as of late. I had a baby 2 months this week, and I also bought a business back in June, and it's not been an easy transition. It's been a lot of work, as you would expect being a parent, and transitioning a business under the Good Advice brand. But beyond that, there's just been some shenanigans that have happened. Computer died last week, and I have done a pretty good job over the last few years making sure that computer files and things like that were on extra drives. And, for example, all of these podcast episodes get put up onto a Google Drive, so there's a lot of backups there. But unfortunately, all of my podcast settings were not backed up. And so when the computer died, it took a little bit of work to get everything running again. And so we're back. We're back in business. And I do apologize for being a little bit out. On social media, we typically post every day, and we've been doing about every other day as of late. Again, just navigating the busyness of life, I guess. So if you're a longtime listener, you've been wondering where you've been, what's been going on, that's what's been going on. And, it's all good. It's all good problems to have. So I want to talk today about managing customer expectations and things that can happen that can really work against you in business. And real quick, I'll just go ahead and getting on the same page. I'll explain what this episode is not and really be cut and dry on what I'm not communicating today. What we're not talking about today, we're not talking about hiding information from a customer. We're not talking about lying to a customer. You screwed something up and you told them it all went great. We're not talking about, you made a mistake, you messed something up and you blamed it on that was probably that was another agency or, what have you. We're not talking about obfuscating key information or, you run a marketing company and they say, am I number one on Google for anything? And you're like, yeah, you are. But you decline to mention that they're number one, like for their own business name. It's just like simple stuff that, you're lying. It's not cool. You're not doing the right thing. We're not talking about any of that today. But I do want to talk about not being overly transparent with your customers in a way that they cannot fully understand, comprehend, and make a good judgment on the effectiveness of your work. We're gonna get into that today. We're gonna talk about it today. And this is a little bit of a bit of a niche conversation, but I will say the earlier you can learn how to do this, the better it will be for you. And we'll just talk at a high level about this. Your customers are paying you for a service. They're paying someone who's experienced. They're paying someone who is the best option for their dollar. And regardless of whatever your price point is, they are paying for you because they really feel like you are the one who can answer that problem for them, that you can solve it for them. And again, that you are the one who's going to make their pain point go away. So talking about this in terms of just generalities and like very simple examples, assume, for example, that you are and people have pretty much heard this analogy before, but assume that you are an electrician and power goes out in a house. The person keeps flipping the breaker. Maybe they've already themselves like replaced fuses in the breaker box. It's not working. And so you come in and you take a look and in like 30 minutes, you realize it's a very niche issue. You go through some things that you've just learned over the last 30 years of being an electrician. You check through these things very quickly because you've done this. You could do it in your sleep. And again, in about 30 minutes or 40 minutes, you realize, hey, the issue is not the breaker box. It is a bad light bulb, which this was actually something that happened to me. We could not figure out what was going on. And sure enough, it was this one bad thing that was tripping the entirety of the house. And it's only because we had someone who had done 30 years as an electrician that this person was able to speak to this. It wasn't like in a manual or wasn't like maybe nowadays this is like a very simple thing. I don't know. But as he put it, he was like, yeah, a lot of people wouldn't know this. I only know it because I've seen it happen a few times over 30 years. So imagine that your electrician comes, they fix it in 30 minutes, and then they give you a bill for $200. Well, there are many people who are going to have a problem with that. There's going to be people who say, wait, what? You're charging me that much for something so small? And people in general have a very difficult time of quantifying value according to experience and, lived expertise and things that they can't, like with their five senses, reach out and touch and understand and comprehend. So everybody knows the analogy or the story of, the electrician who says, well, that $200 is because I know exactly where to check, where that fuse goes, or where, what light bulb to look at, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, we have a world where people are always looking for the cheapest option and the cheapest price, and they have a hard time understanding value. It's also why there's always going to be people who they look for the cheapest possible option for whatever issue they want solved, and why, just as an unrelated note, it's important that you and your services, that you're not that cheapest option, because you are working with some very difficult people. So people in general have a hard time quantifying value. They have a hard time understanding value. And so even though you're doing a great job, you want to be careful being as transparent as possible, because sometimes that transparency can work against you, where the customer then begins to question if they're really getting the value that you're trying to charge for. And I'll give a handful of examples of this today. Now, I think sometimes the reason we're so transparent is because maybe we're apprehensive around the price. Maybe we're nervous around charging whatever dollar amount we want to charge. And we want to give the customer the line items on, here's everything we did. Here's all the work we did. Here's all the information. And so therefore, you should feel comfortable paying me X amount of dollars. Other times we're trying to be, just as earnest as we can with the customer. We want the customer to know that we're genuine in doing the things we said we would do. And so we give them as many data points as possible so that they know that they're not getting scammed. They know that you didn't take their money and then didn't look at, their website or didn't look at their books or whatever service you do. That you didn't disappear for 2 weeks. They want to know that they're actually, especially in a world where so many people are scammers and liars and, lazy, and not even just all of these malicious things. There's just lots of businesses out there where businesses are just incompetent. They just don't know how to work with customers or how to navigate some of these things. Just like you put attention to the quality of work that you do, you also want to put some attention on how that work comes across to the customer. Now, this isn't something that I've always done perfectly. In fact, I can think of a handful of situations where, maybe I was a little bit too earnest or too forthcoming on information just because I wanted, the customer to be fully in the loop. And then I realized, dang, I probably shouldn't have mentioned that because now the customer's worried, or now the customer's apprehensive, or now the customer, like I mentioned, is questioning value. You can do a great job, but if you haven't managed expectations accordingly, you can have a customer who's not happy and not content and who is, even maybe unhappy with you and wondering why they're paying you. So let me give you some examples of this. So I had a customer of mine who we were doing some work together, and we were looking at some of the things that he was providing for his customers. And one of those things was this big, it was basically like a marketing agency. And he was giving them a report on like basically all the traffic they were receiving to their website. So like Facebook, Instagram, organic, direct traffic. I mean, literally everything. I mean, any single person who ever went to this company's website, this business was reporting on it. And so this data report had become several pages in length, and he was getting paid to basically submit this every month to the marketing team of that customer's customer. So my customer's getting paid to provide this data analysis to their customer. And we're looking at it, and I'm like, dude, this is way too much information. This is way too much information for this customer to have. And it's not because any of it's bad data. It's that there is no way in the world that your customer can make a strategic decision based on pages and pages of data that they're receiving every single month. Now, what would be more useful to them would be like a high level one page on here's what we're seeing, here's what's happening, here's what's going on in terms of momentum point of view for your website. But even that, here's the thing that's also interesting about this was my customer, their marketing work was a very narrow sliver of this customer's traffic. They didn't handle any Facebook. They didn't handle any Instagram, but they're reporting on it. And unfortunately, I'm not saying this is true for all your customers. Unfortunately, people are stupid. And unfortunately, people have a hard time remembering certain details. I had a customer get on to me because, and this has actually happened a few times, funny enough. I had a customer get on to me because their website wasn't working, and turns out they didn't pay their website bill. And so they were like, oh, okay, so it wasn't your fault. I'm like, no, it wasn't. You got to pay your bills. So unfortunately, there's people out there who they don't fully track these things. And why would they? They have, 30 or 40 things that they're probably managing in a given day. So another reason that you don't want to give every single detail to a customer is because you don't want them to attribute things that aren't working with you. So if you don't manage Facebook for a customer, if you don't, trying to think of like other examples that isn't like just marketing, but if the service you provide, if they're asking for your opinion on a service that you don't provide, sometimes we want to, again, in being earnest and genuine and really wanting to help the customer, we jump in and provide our insight, or we say, yeah, I can do that, or yeah, I can help out there, rather than simply protecting your boundaries and saying, you know what, that's really not something that I can speak on. I'm not really sure about that. Or more importantly, hey, this is really something that let me provide data on what our services are doing for you. Just so you don't like, I mean, now that I think about it, I had a customer who we were talking about the traffic going to his website, and we started talking about email marketing, and he's like, I'm not seeing the traction from the email marketing standpoint. And I'm thinking, we don't do email marketing. We don't do your email marketing. Like, why is this a and he's like, right. I just thought maybe this would be relevance, since you're handling traffic. And it was like, okay, hang on. Here's the traffic we're handling. Let's get back on the same page here. Here's the traffic we're handling. Anything else is, whether that's with another agency, another company, or just individually for you, that's something that, we're not going to report on. We're not going to talk about. We're not involved in that. So this also gets a bit interesting. Again, we're not talking about obfuscating information or hiding information, but this also gets a bit interesting when you start to think about effective data or effective information that your customer can make good decisions on. And this is a bit tricky because sometimes you withhold information not because it would be harmful to you, but it would be if the customer was to start indulging in that kind of data, they would make decisions that would not be helpful for them. So imagine you run a travel agency and somebody wants to go to Costa Rica, and you have 3 resorts that you know of that are great options, and there is a 4th one that is cheaper, but the last 5 people who went there had miserable experiences. Somebody got robbed. You're thinking, I'm never going to recommend that resort. Well, you're not going to bring that resort up to the customer. And unfortunately, customers, they have a hard time navigating data. And it's also the Peter principle in that, we think we're smart enough. This is the TikTok world too, by the way. Like, everybody's an expert on something. And I really feel like today's generation of just culture, not like age generation, but just like where we are culturally, I feel like people have a difficult time with humility and just saying, man, I have no idea. I don't know what that is. What is that? What are you talking about there? I mean, oh my gosh, the number of acronyms in the business world. Somebody just dropped one with me the other day, and I said, well, what is that? And he was like, well, it means this. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. But I was like, I don't know what that is. What is that? Now, I don't want to be I always try to balance this. And I've been in conversations where it's moving quick enough where just in the sake of moving the conversation forward, I'm just like, right. And in my head, I'm like, what the heck was that? I don't know what he's talking about there. But, just being humble enough and finding the right opportunities to, stay in your lane. Well, customers aren't always great at doing that. So you have this resort, and in some cases you might be like, hey, there is this resort. I wouldn't recommend it. It's, it's definitely cheaper than the other 3. You get what you pay for. Again, I would not recommend it. Well, what happens if the customer says, hey, thank you for telling me that. I think I am going to do that resort. And then they go and they get robbed, or they have a terrible experience. The food's terrible. They get food poisoning, what have you. Are they going to leave you a 5-star review? No. Are they going to say, man, geez, I did my travel agent told me not to go here, but it seemed like a great deal, and so I did it anyway. It's my bad. Rarely will someone do that. Most of the time, someone's going to drop you a 1-star review. They're going to be like, I don't know why they mentioned it. It was a terrible experience, yada, yada. And you're sitting there thinking like, well, I literally said not to go there. And so as you get more experienced, you will learn not to recommend that 4th option anyway, because it creates more pain than the benefits of transparency. So again, we're not talking about hiding things or lying to customers or obfuscating information. We're talking about you're getting paid for a service, and so you have to give the best recommendations to your customers. And that means certain options you're not including because you know it genuinely is not in their best interest. We get into the situation too with like SEO and keyword data. So I have a customer that we have something like 5,000 keywords for. The business that I bought, they had worked with them for 6 or 7 years. I mean, there's years of data. So on our monthly report that we send, what's on that monthly report here are the keywords we improved. It is not an exhaustive keyword list. First of all, it'd be way more information than anyone would be able to work with. There's no way we could effectively give them a monthly report with 5,000 keywords and expect them to make effective strategy decisions based on this. So we give them a curated list. It's related to the keywords that we have worked on, that the work that we have done, and we say, hey, here's how we've improved your rankings. And these are keywords that we agreed on in terms of strategy. We said we're going to go after these kinds of customers. So here are the keywords that we have improved because of that. So I'm not giving them the 5,000 keywords, and I'm also not giving them a list of keywords that lost rankings. With 5,000 keywords, every single month, there is going to be hundreds of keywords that have lost ranking. It's just how it works. And not only to mention that, rankings go up and down. They sometimes swing up very high, and sometimes they swing down temporarily just for a month. You could be on page 1, and then suddenly you drop to page 3, but you're only there for 30 days. And after 30 days, it's back to normal. You're back on page 1 again. Why did you drop for 30 days? I have no idea. Sometimes it just happens. Sometimes that kind of stuff can just happen. So what I don't want is a customer to hyper-focus. I mean, think about this. When you get feedback from a colleague, you don't read the positive stuff. You go straight to the negative. Okay, yeah, what did you really think about? What did you say about? What do I need to work on? Like, that's just human nature. And in the same way, when you get an SEO report, you're not looking at the greens. You're going down and looking at the reds. I had this happen with a customer where it wasn't even my customer. I inherited this customer, but they were looking at some data and they were like, hey, why did we lose this ranking for this? And it was like a random abstract term. And I was really just kind of like, I don't know. I don't know why you lost that. We haven't targeted it. I mean, you're going to lose it. But the person was like, but why? Isn't that important? Isn't that an important term? And I was like, no, it's really not an important term. And according to the strategy that we're working on, no, it's not. It's not the product you sell. We do sell it. Yeah, you sell it, but it's 5% of your overall revenue. It's not your main bread and butter thing. So then you find yourself getting into these back and forths with a customer where now you're having to legitimize to the customer that, one, you know what you're talking about, and two, that you are the right answer for them. And it's like, wouldn't you just rather sell your service and just do a good job? To be able to do that, you have to be mindful of all the information you give to your customers. You have to be aware of everything getting filtered in terms of what is most beneficial and effective for the customer. What allows them to stay in their lane while you being able to stay in yours. There's just certain things I'm never going to tell a customer because my world is not their world. And as badly as we want to be an expert in everything, these people are not experts in my thing. And if they were, they would have done it themselves. They didn't do it themselves because they didn't know how, or they didn't have time, or they wanted someone else to handle it, or what have you. Now, this is not to say that you, even when you curate this information well, that you won't still have sometimes difficult conversations. Sometimes it is an expertise thing. You miss something that was really a best practice. You didn't realize it was a best practice. And so now when the customer asks about it, it's like, oh, geez, we really should have done that. I had this happen just the other day, which, my world right now is just all marketing because we bought this marketing business. So I apologize that all my examples keep coming back to this, but we bought this marketing business and we revised some content on a customer's website, but we didn't touch the marketing content that was already there. So this customer had paid another marketing company to basically build out their web pages, and then they needed content to support those pages. So we added that content. We sort of like built the supporting content for them for SEO purposes. Well, then the customer came back, and this is exactly what I'm talking about. This customer came back and they were like, well, there's like grammar issues and typos and things that are missing on the core pages that this other marketing company did. Why didn't y'all fix that? Which in hindsight, we probably should have fixed it. Or we should have probably said, hey, I'm noticing these things that this other company didn't do that they probably should have done. Would you like us to fix that? Or we can go ahead and fix it for you. But because I was really focused on the service we were providing, and I was thinking, well, we didn't manage that. We didn't handle that. Well, the customer comes back to us and is like, well, I don't understand why this wasn't corrected. Even though they probably should have originally, when they paid their first marketing company, they probably should have said, hey, this is not correct, what have you. In this particular case, the customer just had not even looked at the old content until he worked with us. And so he didn't even realize that these errors were there. But now we have a process going forward on, hey, any page we touch, we're going to do a visual check, a spot check. We're going to make sure that it represents our brand well, even if there's elements that we don't always touch. So keep that in mind. Your customer's happy. Again, even when you do a great job, your customer's happiness is often directly related to how much information you choose to give them. And part of this is also just being confident in what you do, confident in what you sell. I'm never going to, if a project takes me an hour, I'm not going to tell a customer it took me 10. But if I'm sending an invoice for $600 and it took me an hour, I'm not going to say, hey, this only took me an hour. I'm not going to do that. If they made 80 grand on my 1 hours of work, I should be paid accordingly for that. Now, this is a pretty terrible example anyway, because this never happened and I have never made anyone that much money in 1 hour of work, nor have I ever charged $600 for an hour of work either. So terrible example. But the point still remains, like, I'm not going to talk about how much time I spent on a project. I'm not going to be like, well, I spent all this time. So I'm not going to try to legitimize the value. I'm not going to try to, I told a story about a guy who wanted to know how many hours he was getting in the marketing world. And I was like, man, we just focus on results. That's all we focus on. We just focus on results. And this is what we charge. And it's fair according to the market. I know what other marketing companies are charging. It's a good price. It's honest. It's fair. And it is transparent in the sense of we will honestly and ethically get you the results that we said we were going to. And if we don't, you can know we're going to make it right. Whether that's money back or whether that's, hey, we said we'd do it in 12 months. We're going to get it done. It's just going to take 15. So all that to say, keep in mind how you're talking to your customers and the kinds of information you're giving them, because even when you're great at your job, you want your customers to be happy. And that sometimes means not giving them every single data point. Hey, thanks for checking out today's podcast episode. If you're a first-time listener, what are you waiting on? Click the subscribe or follow button. And thank you so much for those of you who've been long-term listeners, especially those of you who've been on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice for $5 a month. You can support the podcast, which, man, nowadays, that's a steal. That's cheaper than a cup of coffee. I need to run with that. Cheaper than a cup of coffee. You can support the podcast. Anywho, I so appreciate you all. I appreciate the businesses who have sponsored the show. That's all we got today. See you later.